Thank you very much. Can you hear me? Yes. That's good. May I just start by saying how many of you are either studying science or is a scientist? Yeah, and how many are studying management or have a management degree? Okay, thank you very much. I'll start by introducing a little bit about Denmark. So this is Denmark in Europe, fairly small country. We are considered to be like a fairy tale country. We have Hans Christian Andersen writing novels about the Little Mermaid, and we have a royal family, and we have a guard which comes out every day. But we do also have a number of large companies, and I hope that you are familiar at least with some of them, Carlsberg, Lego, Maersk, which are Danish entities. In Denmark, we have very high social security, we have very high welfare, very high equality, so there's very little financial difference between being poor and rich in Denmark. We have free education, free hospitals, so all treatment will be free. And we are sometimes been nominated as the happiest people in the world. I don't know why. There's also another side to Denmark, and that is that our culture is very much the same as in Norway and Sweden, and we are very heavily involved under the influence of the Social Democrats, which is in US would be considered a liberal left-wing party. But we are brought up to be employees. We have 6 weeks of vacation every year, and we have a lot of holidays also. If you get a child, you will have 12 months of maternity leave, and you can share it between the man and the wife. So the man could go 6 months on maternity leave if he wanted. And it's almost impossible to fire a pregnant employee. So the moment a girl comes up to the employer and say, I'm pregnant, I'm due in whatever, 6-7 months time, she cannot be fired. And after that, she can have 12 months of maternity leave. And if she gets a second child in that period, she'll have another 12 months afterwards. We have very high salary levels, so we have about a minimum wage of 25 Singapore dollars per hour. You cannot go below that. And if you're unemployment, you will get around 3,200 Singapore dollars per month, not having to do anything, which means that actually 10% of our working force, which are the low income, because there's also other welfare benefits if you're unemployed. So you get support for your housing, things like that. So we have about 10% of the people who have no financial reason to have work because they will get the same financially out of it. But it comes at a cost, and that is that we have a very high progressive tax system. So I pay about 60% of my income in tax. And the reason why I'm telling you all this is that I'm here to talk about entrepreneurs and innovation. And I'd just like to mention that the reward-risk ratio to start a company in Denmark is much lower than in other countries because we have this security system if you're an employee. And you have to abandon all that if you want to become an entrepreneur. Nevertheless, we have a huge amount of startup companies in Denmark. This is just the eastern part of Denmark, and this is the southwestern part of Sweden. We have what we call Medicon Valley, which is a hub, a cluster of biotech companies, and it's about the third largest in Europe, and 60% of all biotech industry is in this small region of Scandinavia. We have a bridge and a huge collaboration between these two areas. Previously, this part of Sweden belonged to Denmark, and we're trying to claim it back, but I don't think we will be successful in that. I will now switch gear and talk about the interaction between people when you're working. I will talk about what is important in order to create innovative companies. And you need 3 things if you want to be successful creating a cluster. One is that, of course, you need the top science, you need the recruitment base, and you need the finance. And if we look at science first, we have some very excellent universities in the region. We have University of Copenhagen, we have the Danish Technical University, and on the Swedish side, we have University of Lund. And all 3 companies are normally rated in the top 100 universities in the world. We do also have a huge amount of larger pharma companies in the region from where we can recruit specialists, people who understand clinical trials, regulatory processes, things like that. So we have Novo Nordisk in Denmark, Lundbeck, and Leo Pharma in Denmark, and on the Swedish side we have AstraZeneca, and Ferring is also on the Danish side. With regard to finance, we have some initiatives from the government, but we do still need further financing because we have lack of venture capital, which is a huge problem. The greatest problem, and the reason for that is that I don't believe that the venture capital model and biotech fits very well together. I don't have the time to go into too many details about this. The major problem is that in biotech, you have longer time spans than a venture capitalist company normally would like to see. A venture capitalist would like to see an exit within, let's say, 7-8 years' time, maximally, and biotech companies might take 10 to 15 years before they're successful. So I'll talk a little bit about myself. I'm a scientist. Perhaps I should do it very shortly because I was so well introduced. But I'm from the University of Copenhagen, and I worked as a scientist in Ferrosan, which was a small biotech company, and I was lucky enough very soon to not just being a junior scientist, but head of behavioral pharmacology. And I was involved in development drugs against anxiety, epilepsy, Alzheimer's disease. Then I was a co-founder of Neurosearch, where I became director of pharmacology, and I had a group of 40 people reporting to me, and we were developing drugs against Parkinson's disease, epilepsy, and brain damage following stroke. Then I've had a number of positions in my career, first Ferrosan and Neurosearch. Then I became the CEO and co-founder of Curion, which is today changed name into Santaris Pharma, and it was just sold 2 months ago for $250 million US. I was approached by Danske Bank, which is the largest bank in Denmark, to become the managing partner of a venture fund with offices in Oslo, in Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Denmark. Unfortunately, after I've been there for 1.5 years' time, the bank decided not to be in private equity, and they just closed it all. I was then vice president of Life Cycle Pharma, another company which is now listed on the Copenhagen Stock Exchange. I became CEO of Glycom. They are synthesizing sugar molecules, oligosaccharides, in bulk parts, and these sugar molecules are very important for the infant baby, and there's a huge amount of these sugar molecules in breast milk, but they cannot be retrieved from other sources. So the whole idea there is to make it bulk, thousands of tons a year, and then add it to infant formula. And it's quite a successful company. Then I worked for 7 years at CAT, which is a small venture fund which get government money to invest in startup companies. And then I'm CEO of Rose Pharma, which is a very small biotech company. I've been an entrepreneur, co-founder of Neurosearch. I talked about that. I was involved in the startup of GeneMap and was on the board of directors, and that has been extremely successful company, one of the largest in Europe, with a market cap around 4 billion Singapore dollars at the moment. I was involved in the spin-out of Bavarian Nordic from Neurosearch, and that has also been quite successful. I've been a co-founder of Zealand Pharma and on the board of directors of that company. They are producing or developing GLP-1 analogs for the treatment of type 2 diabetes and have a huge collaboration with Sanofi Aventis, which is going quite well. I also talked about Curion, which was just sold. I'm currently the chairman of Sinome, which is a company I co-founded together with a scientist in England, in Cambridge, working in neuroscience, as I did in Neurosearch and previously. And I've been involved in the startup of 2 diagnostic companies, Hygia Diagnostic and BlueSense Diagnostic, and I'm the chairman in this company and board member in that company. And I've been on a number of boards. I will not waste more time on that. At the moment, I'm involved in these companies. So let's talk about the interaction, because this is one of the more critical parts. How do people interact with each other if you're a scientist or if you're a business person or if you're investors? Because there are huge cultural differences, at least in Denmark. You could also say it's the difference between the chief scientific officer versus the chief executive officer or the chief financial officer or the board of directors, because normally investors, they take board seats. But let's move back. How do these people, what is a major difference between them? If you talk about the scientists first, they put a lot of pride in that everything they say is correct. They always want to make a product better. They are never satisfied that a product is good enough, so they would rather spend 6 more time trying to develop an even better product. They have difficulties in giving deadlines. If you ask a scientist, when will this be finished, they'll just say, I don't know, perhaps in a couple of months' time. So it's very, very difficult to do that. And they also find it difficult to give definite answers. If you ask someone, a scientist, can you do this? They'll come up with all the arguments why it might not be a success. And it creates a lot of problem if you're talking, especially to investors, because they would like to get definite answers, say, yes, of course we can. You'll never get a scientist to say that. They are more or less driven by scientific glory, and they want to have autonomy. They want to be independent and just do their science because that's what they like. If you then, on the other hand, talks about investors, and I know I'm exaggerating all this, so I apologize if some of you get offended by this. I've been a little bit of all three, so I feel I have the right to make harsh comments because it's inflicted on myself every time also. Investors, they want to have plans and deadlines. They want to have very simple answers and guarantees, and they want plans based on market analysis, which scientists very often find it very difficult to make. If we're talking about the business people, they also want to have plans and deadlines, but they want to have realistic milestones because they are judged in their job by the investors or by the board on whether they reach these milestones or not. And then they want to please the board, the investors, because they want to keep the job, they want to get a higher bonus, things like that. Due to these cultural differences, what happened here? Up. Can someone? No, it's there. Okay. Due to this, there's very often a huge problem communicating between scientists and investors because they are speaking totally different languages. Similarly, there might be a lot of problems communicating between the business people or the scientists, but at least they have to talk to each other. Due to these different cultural backgrounds in this, I find it very often that the best business people, they're people which have been scientists previously, because then they understand the sciences, but then they have evolved the skills of being a business person. But I've also seen many business people who can do this very elegantly. If we're then talking about exits, because very often investors always talk about exits, and most scientists somehow would also like to see that, there's again some huge differences. So investors, they would probably prefer trade sale because it's much faster and safer exit route. And very often you can have much higher exit value if you are making a trade sale. On the other hand, scientists, they would prefer an IPO, initial public offering, becoming a public company, because then you maintain the company and you maintain some degree of autonomy instead of being sold to another company and you never know what happens there. Business people, they're in between investors and scientists. It depends upon the emotion involved in the CEO, for instance, or the chief scientific officer. Some would prefer a rapid exit and the bonus, especially if they have been promised a huge bonus if they can sell the company. Others would like to see the pride in being the CEO of a public company because that's a lot of pride in being that. So I'll leave that now, and I'll go back and talk about the science. And I have a very simple question, and I apologize if you find this very naive. But just to illustrate, which of these two companies would you, if you were an investor, would you invest in? Would it be company A, which has a superior technology but mediocre management, or would you rather like company B, which has a mediocre technology but a superior management? So raise your arms if you would prefer company A. Few ones. And sorry? Nice thinking. And what about company B? Yeah, it's like 2/3 saying company B and 1/3 saying company A. I would definitely go for company B because the management is so important. And there are so many reasons why a company will fail. And it's usually down to a very simple thing. People cannot agree, other problems which are not solved the right way. And you can very often get around technology. And I'll give you, so biotech, in my mind, is people's business. Being a successful biotech company is not about superior technology, but all about superior management. And I'll give you these two examples because I was involved in neuroresearch. When we started the company, we were more or less just a management team, and we had no technology whatsoever. But we have been extremely successful, and we were able to raise capital, and then we started to develop the technology. So this was like an empty company in the beginning, just 6 people forming this company. We have the proven track record that we could create good business previously, and someone luckily believed in us. So we started the company with no technology at all. The same happened to Symphogen, another Danish company, which is extremely successful. It was a group of people who would like to start a company in Denmark. They didn't really know what to do, so they were just searching for new technology. They found a technology at MIT in Boston, in the US. They acquired a right to acquire the patent estate, went back to Denmark, found some investors, got the patent estate, and they have been extremely successful. So these two companies actually started both without having any technology at all, but they have been successful. So I'll shift gear a little bit again. Greed is good, or is it? Again, this is a very simple question. This is, by the way, Michael Douglas in the movie called Wall Street, where he was teaching greed is good. The reason why I've shown you this is that I've seen so many people being so afraid of sharing values in a company in order to grow it, because they say, oh, I will be fooled, I will lose control, I will do everything. So again, very, very simple. Most of the people would say, I would prefer 40% of this company than make a merger with someone else, and then I might only have one person left, which of course is very, again, very, very simple cartoon here. But what if the difference was that this company would be successful and this one would not, and you ended up that the value of this company would be like this, or the value would be like this, then I would definitely prefer the 1% over the 40%. And I've seen it so many times. This is one of the major mistakes. It's so simple, but there are so many people which are just thinking that you will lose more. Another similar situation is that if you're a technology-based company, you have a technology platform, then very often they say, but we would like to defend ourselves, we would like to keep everything in-house because we are afraid of other companies just taking the whole idea and getting all the monies. And then in order to do that, you can probably only have the resources and the finance to one product, and you need to go out and find investors. So you will dilute your ownership because of the investment, so you need to drive the company. And there's a high risk of failure. But on the other hand, if you really believe that you have a technology platform, you could start with the first product, find a company that would invest in this product, and let's say that you could only obtain a very bad deal compared with what you would normally think. Let's say that the value up here for this investment would only be like 20% of what you would normally expect from such a deal. It doesn't really matter much, because what happens here is that, first of all, this company also comes with resources and skill sets. They come with money, which goes back into the company, but they will also contribute with resources. So you can run this product, or this company can actually run this product, and you can then concentrate on your next product. And then you can do the same again. You can enter into a deal which might not be perfect, but it still creates some income for you, and it gives you a lot of credibility. And of course, you can figure out the math here. So what happened here is that with a number of products, you minimize the profit on each product, which of course is a bad side. but you also minimize the need for investments, so you're not diluted in your company. And you minimize the risk of failure, because this product might fail, and this product might fail, but this one might be successful, and then you're still well off. And you get someone, when you enter into a collaboration with a large pharma company or medtech company, it validates the technology. It would be much easier to enter into the next agreement and the next agreement, because now you're validated. People trust that this is a good technology, and it provides funding for in-house products. So this is another way of seeing that if you're too greedy, you're too nervous to lose, you might not be able to fulfill all your hopes and expectations to create value in a company. And I do believe that this way would be much better than trying to run it all in-house. The next one, I'll talk about that trust is good, but control is much better. I'll give you some examples, because in my professional life, I've met a number of people which have had strange behavior. We had a scientist at Neurosearch which said that he would like to go to a scientific conference on Jamaica, and he had a business card and he was allowed to go there, and he went there, came back, and afterwards we found out that on the expense account was not only his flight ticket but also a female which was not his wife, and he was married, and also that he went to Jamaica, but it was not at the same time when there was this conference. So we didn't control it, but that's what happened there. I was looking once at investing into a Swedish company, and I knew the CEO of this company quite well. It was a guy I would go out and have a drink with if I was in Stockholm. And we looked at the company. It was against Alzheimer's disease, and it was quite interesting. And we asked him about the patent estate, and he said it was fine. And we asked him about, do you know if there's any problem with freedom to operate? And he said, no, we have looked into it. There's freedom to operate. We looked further and looked at another issues in the company, and then we got a rumor that they have actually talked to another venture company, and that they had discovered some problems with the patent estate. So we talked to them, because venture capitalists talk to each other. And it actually turned out that there was a US-based patent which totally dominated what they were going to do. So there was absolutely no way that they could run a business. I then called this guy and I said, hello, Pierre. His name was Pierre. How are you doing? Fine. And I then asked him about whether he knew about this patent. He said, yes, we know about this patent. So you also know that there's absolutely no freedom to operate. Yes, that's correct. But I asked you previously, and you said there was no problem. I said, well, I think it's up to the investors to figure out themselves. So I never invested in this guy again. Another situation was that I talked to a person, and he called me once and said, well, he was driving in his car. I just talked to this guy, which was a very famous Danish investor, and we had lunch together, and he's very much interested in this, and he wanted me also to join him in the company. What he didn't know was that I knew this guy pretty well, so I called him, and he said, who? I don't know this guy. Total lie. So there's a lot of people who come up with those kind of ideas. We also had a situation where we were in a company, and for some reason we couldn't understand that we had a cash flow issue. And this person then said, well, don't worry, he was a CEO and also a co-founder. I will help us through this period until we get the next payment. So I will lend the company, how much? It was 20,000 British pounds, quite a substantial amount of money, so we will help you. And it was not until later we found out that he drained the company for all the money, and he never gave this money into the company. It was just in order to get more time, to take more money out of the company. So there's a lot of people who will make fraud, unfortunately. So my perhaps most important advice is that make sure if you establish a company to establish very simple but effective corporate control mechanism. For instance, that two persons need to approve all expenses before they can be paid out, or that you have monthly transcripts of all bank transactions so you can actually have an understanding of what's going on. If we have done that, we wouldn't have had at least the last problem I talked about. But this is very important. even though you trusted people, and some of these people I've trusted a lot, but was very much surprised when I learned all this. And this is along the same line. So in biotech, over the years, I believe that we in biotech have an overrepresentation of stubborn people and psychopaths. And I'll explain why. In order just to become a scientist and to get a PhD, you need to be very determined and willing to take sacrifices. If you then on top of that, oops, sorry, there's something. Yep. If you then on top of that would like to become an entrepreneur, you need to be even more determined and willing to take even more sacrifices. And what is actually the core traits of psychopaths? That is, they have extreme determination and lack of empathy. So they are the core traits of psychopaths. So I do believe that we have an overrepresentation in this area for some reason. I've given you some few examples there, but I could tell more examples. So can you imagine another business where you would also see a lot of people which are extremely ambitious and don't care about anybody else but themselves? Politics? Yeah. Perhaps especially US politics. That's correct. Something else? Speak out. Yeah, that's correct. I just had one example, so I'll just skip to that one. Professional sport. Because they are so ambitious. And I don't know if you know them. O.J. Simpson, football player in the US, killed his wife. Mike Tyson was convicted to jail for raping a female and also biting out a piece of the ear of Evander Holyfield. John McEnroe, perhaps some of the young people here don't know him, but he was quite a character when he played. Suarez, football player, just 2-3 months ago, he bit an Italian in one of these matches, and Pretorius, he's just been sentenced that he killed his girlfriend. So there's a lot of odd characters. And of course, it's the same core trait of personality which will drive you towards being successful in one area or the other. And I have to say that I've been an athlete myself, and I have also a degree from the University of Copenhagen in physical training. So when I prepared this, I was a little bit nervous about myself if I would also fall into this category. I don't hope so, at least. Let's move on. I'll give you some more examples about stubbornness in scientists. I was once a CEO of a company, and we were looking to make a collaboration and look for whether we could develop drugs against cancer in oncology. And I arranged that we should make a collaboration with a very, very famous Danish oncologist and our chief scientific officer, and him then agreed that they should come to his lab on a specific date and conduct some preliminary experiments. And this oncologist sent a mail, what kind of equipment do you need? And he never got a response. Our chief scientific officer came up to the lab that day, and the first question he asked was to technicians, where is a centrifuge I can use? And this lady said, well, I've never heard that you should have a centrifuge, and those we have at the moment, they are occupied, so I can't give you one right now. And he just became so furious that he came back to me and said, such an idiot. I will never collaborate with him because he should have known that I needed a centrifuge. And I said to him, well, but you've been asked what you needed, and you didn't respond to it, so it's your own fault. And then he just said, I don't care. Such a stupid person. I don't care if he's the prime minister. I don't care if he's the pope. I will not collaborate with him. And that was the end of it. Another thing is that sometimes the CEO title is like the ring in the Lord of the Rings. It becomes precious, and you will not give it away. I once invested in a company. There was a guy who was a technician, and he had invented a new way of synthesizing DNA, which was much smarter than what you could do but he had absolutely no business skills. And he agreed, and it was written in the contract that we got some other investors into the company, that he should just start building the prototype, which would take about 6 months' time, and after that 6 months period, we would hire a CEO to run the company. And we all agreed, and he signed it. And after this 6 months period was gone, and he had actually made this prototype, he came to me, and I was the chairman, he came to me and said, well, I took a one-day course in management, so I think now that I can be the CEO. And I tried to explain to him that perhaps he didn't get the right skills in a one-day seminar in management, but he believed so. Anyhow, we insisted that we should hire a CEO, and every time we came up with a candidate, he couldn't collaborate with him, and he just refused to collaborate with him, and it all went bad, and at the end, all the money ran out. He had not reached the milestones. The investors came back to him and said, okay, we'll invest more money into your company, but you need to accept this person as the CEO. And to our surprise, he just said, no, I'd rather go bankrupt. And that's what happened. So, very strange behavior sometimes. Another topic here is very often, if you're looking at technologies, you can go in so many different directions. And it's very important to stay focused. So spin out activities which are outside your core area. Stay focused because you cannot manage too many activities. And I'll give you an example. Again, at Neurosearch, at one point in time, we saw some possibilities to work with some vaccine technologies, and we spun out Bavarian Nordic, which have become extremely successful company. We also spun out another company in NSG, which has been somewhat successful, and we spun out a technology company called Sophion, and we spun out another company called Head Explorer, which was not successful. But these three companies are still alive and doing well. And it has been very important for us at Neurosearch to stay focused, so we didn't have too many people to administer things like that. You get diluted, so it's much better to do it this way. I'll give you another example. There's a US-based company called Medarex. Many years ago, they invented a technology to make fully human monoclonal antibodies, which is much better than monoclonal antibodies, which is derived from pigs. Even though you try to make them more and more human-like, there'll still be an immunological problem. But they had a technology where it was fully human monoclonal antibodies. And they were doing quite well. But nevertheless, they decided to make a European subsidiary or an independent company, which was GeneMap, and I was involved in this company, and as I said previously, also on the board of directors, and that became also very successful. So this is a slide for a couple of years ago. The market cap of Medarex at that point in time was just below $1 billion US, but the market cap of GeneMap was $1.6 billion US, and because Medarex had a huge amount of shares in GeneMap, they actually managed to get $650 million US back when they sold their shares. So about 2/3 of the value of Medarex came from spinning out a company called GeneMap, even though it could be perceived as being a competitor to themselves. So this has been highly successful for them to make this spin out. Okay. Another topic is that the financial market is very cyclic. So what do you do in recession periods when there's not that much finance around? Normal businesses, I mean any other kind of businesses, they would just lay off non-profitable activities and focus on core activities. You cannot do that if you're a biotech company because you're dependent upon repeated funding many, many times. If you look here at the drug development period, and there will be some stages which takes a long time. You can add this up, and it takes like 10 to 15 years to develop a drug. And you need seed investments and follow-on investments a number of times. Because you will not be able to raise $1 billion or $2 billion US. No investors would give you all that money. So you need all these investments. And what happens if you need some money here, you're running out of money, and the fundraising is difficult because there's no appetite in biotech. Then you might collapse, or you may face huge dilutions. And I've seen that a couple of times, that a very, very promising company just couldn't find the money because they were not available. And it can be a disaster. So what are the funding possibilities? You can go to venture capital, evergreen funds, collaborative agreements, public market, IPO, sorry. And I mentioned before, venture capital might not be the right way to go because they have a very short exit period. They would like to get out of the investment within 5-7 years' time. And if you're running a business where it will take you 12 years before you have reached the full potential or value of the company, then it doesn't matter. So I would clearly prefer finding investors in this area. So another thing is, due to this cyclic period, raise the capital when you can and not when you need it, because when you need it, it might be difficult. It's just like the old saying that if you try to buy an umbrella when it's raining, it might be a little bit more expensive than if it's not raining. And then another thing I've seen go wrong a lot of times, that is that you raise too little capital in a company. So make sure you have raised sufficient capital in order to achieve the next important milestone, which will increase the value of the company. But you also need to add further thing if there's a delay. And you need to add a little bit more if it's going to be a little bit more expensive. And you also need to add, and this is the part which is very often going wrong, that is people might add in all this, but they forget that you also need to execute on the milestones that you have achieved, because then you need either to go out and negotiate a new collaborative agreement or find new investors. And that takes 6 to 9 months' time to do. And if you're running out of money here, the first thing a venture capitalist will do is just wait, because they know that sometime this company will be totally out of money and be desperate, so they will accept very, very bad terms for them. So you really need to make sure that you have raised sufficient money, so you don't risk being totally diluted. Then again, I'll talk about raising capital here, and this is more or less the same picture as before. Typically, when you start a company, there will be A shares, which are the founding shares, and then B shares, which have preferential rights, like anti-dilution rights, liquidation preferences. I'll not go into all the details, but there's a benefit of having B shares. Then you could say, but in order to avoid this problem, to spend 6 to 9 months' time to find investors, I'll just make a deal with our current investors that they arrange for the next investment when we have reached the milestone. But that's typically not a good idea, because it can be very, very difficult to persuade the investors in the B shares if they are the only one taking part in the next round to increase the value. So they would argue very much to lower the price. So you really need to find a new investor. The investors having B shares might also participate, but you need a new investor in order to get the true value in the company. And that goes, again, every time. And therefore, when you need a new investor, you need to spend all the time. And therefore, you need to have raised sufficient capital here, both to reach this milestone, but also then to negotiate the next investment round. And that's goes wrong so many times, that people do not add in the time and the need for cash in order to reach the next investment. The next issue, and I'll finish shortly, who's in charge of the fundraising? Again, this is just an example. There are 3 founders, founder A, B, and C, starting a company. They find an investor, and the founders got 2 board seats. One might be an academic professor, don't want to be in the company, so he's a board member, but one becomes a CEO, and another one becomes the chief scientific officer. And then they need to have the next investment round. And again, they should be in charge. If they let the investor in charge, they will not get the value increase that they might otherwise get. So it's very, very important that these people up here will be in charge of the next investment round. Then they get a new investor. This has been very successful. Very often an investor then say, but we need to have a new CEO, which is external. And then one of the founders becomes chief scientific officer, another one becomes director of business development, whatever. And then the problem arises next time they're going to raise money, because these investors, they will incentivize the external CEO. If you can raise the money, we'll give you much more in salary, or we'll give you a warrant program, so you're part of the company. You'll get a bonus. So very often now, the next investment round will be for the benefit of the investors and not for the founders. And very often they do sports seats, things like that. This is of course typical. It might be good for the company to be run by external people because founders tend to be emotional. But if you are looking at a founder's perspective, you might lose not only control, but also all your shares or a lot of shares. So let's move on. Yeah. I'll finish shortly. I'm sorry if I took too much time. So the weakest spots I've seen many times for entrepreneurs is that they believe it's all about technology, which it's not, as I just talked about. And they do not know much about, and they don't understand that it's all about business plan and how to execute a company. Another weak spot is that very often they don't understand the true value of a product. They make an invention, which they believe is great, but they don't understand that making an invention might not be the same as making a product which can reach the market. So very often they come up with a great invention, but it's no value. They need to understand who are their customers and why would they buy the product. And the customers might not be the person using the product. It could be a medical device a person is using, but it's the physician or the hospital which are deciding which product to use. So they need to understand those differences. They need to understand their competitors, not only today, but also what they might have in their pipeline. How would their best product look when we are entering into the market with our product? And how will they penetrate the market? I will give you again some examples. The most stupid plans I've ever seen from entrepreneurs. One said to me, we will not develop any product because our technology platform is so superior that companies will contact us to get a license. And they thought they could just sit back and wait and people would come to them. They were never successful. We have also ones who said, we believe that we can sell this drug on the US market with one sales representative. I mean, even the best indications where you need to go to specialists, you would need hundreds of sales representatives. If you go into the general practitioner, you might need 10,000 in US. We also had one saying, we believe that we can get this drug on the market with a new drug delivery technology within 9 months' time. They had absolutely no clue about the regulatory process, when to get approvals for one stage or another stage, things like that. This will take at least 3, 4, 5 years to do, but they have absolutely no idea about it. Furthermore, many times we have a group of students which sit together and they say, let's start a company together. They have a great idea and they say, okay, let's start it, and then we all get different jobs. So they are very much alike each other. One is then the CEO, another one is Chief Scientific Officer, Chief Financial Officer, Director of Business Development. And they don't see that they are not different, that they don't have the right skills to do this. And very often there are so much mistaken. So these people should have found someone, if they were, let's say they were on NUS, they should have teamed up with someone from Singapore Management University, get the different skills, be different. So does this mean that a company which are started by 4 or 5 student friends and they are just all in this company cannot be successful? No, of course not. And I'll just show you this picture. Can anybody see what it is? Yeah, it's Microsoft when they started in '78. This is Bill Gates. But if you look at this picture, to me they look all like nerds, but they were extremely successful. Okay, so these are my last 2 slides. The best advice I can give to scientists who wants to become an entrepreneur, get industry experience or team up with someone who's got it. Don't think that you can just, because you have invented a technology at the university, you can transform that into a business if you don't understand the industry. And then also very importantly, do it because you're committed to the project, not just because you want to be rich or have a Lamborghini as a company car, because that will not happen. And it's a lot of hard work, but it's a hell of a journey, and I love this journey. Secondly, my best advice to managers working with scientists, how should they react? Because I've talked about all these cultural differences. First of all, be patient. Take your time. Try to understand the science. Try to understand the motivation for the scientist. And this is quite important because they are driven by a totally different motivation than normal people. Make sure you create meaningful incentives for the scientists. They might not think that just a higher salary is the most important thing for him or her. It could be something totally different. Going to scientific conferences, having the permission to write scientific papers, that might be much more important for them. And understand that a process can be extremely chaotic. And believe me, it can be very chaotic. With that, I'll thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen. May I request Mr. Jensen to remain on stage for the Q&A session? I would now like to invite Mr. George Han, Senior Manager of Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship of SMU, to come on stage to facilitate the Q&A session.
Hi, Leif.
Hi.
Let's take a seat. I was told that the accurate pronunciation of his name is Leif. Mm-hmm. So I'll call you Leif then.
Great.
Okay. You want to take a seat?
Yeah.
Now we will take questions from the floor. There are a few ground rules. Please keep your question brief, okay, concise, to the point. I appreciate there's no structured questions where you go part A, part B, part C. That will be cheating. Okay, can I have the first question, please?
Okay, I'd like to clarify regarding the
keep it concise.
The minimizing profit for product and minimizing your need for investment. Okay, that has to do with. Do you agree that? Excuse me. Okay, Patrick. Okay, do you agree that it has to link with the product life cycle? How long the product life shelf? Let's say for a very high-tech product, generally profit margin will be higher because of the very short lifespan. So generally, is there some computing model or formula for that profit margin? How do you set this according to product life cycle and the IP patent rights protection for that particular product? Is that the length of years of protection and the minimum need for investment? Okay, generally when you look at the investment, the type of investment, the product durability.
There's two questions. Okay, so we'll answer your first question, and you only have one question.
Well, I apologize if I fully didn't understand your question, but in biotech it takes a very, very long time before you can actually be able to demonstrate the value. And sometimes even after 10, 15 years, isn't this okay? You still can't really show the value because you still haven't got the drug on the market if it's a pharmaceutical biotech company. But at least you can show now that you have some very, very interesting clinical data. So most will appreciate the value of the company. But most venture capitalists, they are running a 10-year fund and they need to exit all their investments within this 10-year period. And normally they have an investment period of 3 to 4 years' time. So very often, if they make an investment in year 3, they would need to know that they can exit within 7 years because that's a lifespan of a fund, which creates a lot of problem because you would like to have investors for a very longer time. And if you need to exit earlier, you have not reached your potential.
Thank you. Can I have the next question, please? That gentleman. Thank you.
He was just leaving. No.
Okay, my name is Ivan. So my question would be, so you're talking mostly about drug development.
Yes.
But biotech also involves, there are also pure technological solutions, especially in diagnostic areas. Do you see any kind of speed up in tech development cycles in biotech world, pure tech developments?
Yeah, first of all, perhaps I didn't explain myself because I've also been involved in a number of medtech companies, device companies, and diagnostic companies, and they are much more different. They are quite different from the pharmaceutical biotech companies, if I can call it that, because the time to get a drug on a product on the market is much shorter. So very often you can get a product on the market, let's say within 2-3 years time, whereas it would be 12-15 years for a drug, which make the appetite from venture capitalists much larger because it fits much better into their model, and sometimes the value can be also extremely high. So yes, there's a huge difference there with regard to the time span. But I also then have to admit that over the last 5-10 years' time, the regulatory process has changed a lot. It's always been very difficult for drugs to get approved by FDA in US, EMA in Europe, and similar organizations. And it's been fairly easy to get medical devices and diagnostic kits on the market. But today, the demand of documentation has increased dramatically for medical devices and for diagnostic tools. So it might become more and more difficult to get these products on the market within a short period of time.
Thank you. Can I have the next question? Thank you. The gentleman.
Testing. Yeah. What kind of stakeholder dialogue is involved when you're trying to introduce a product which might disrupt the current ways of doing things? For example, you want to consumerize testing to make it accessible to masses. So like if you've seen some companies in the US, only after they had some difficulty with regulations, then the government realized that they actually, well, this is the new business model. So what kind of stakeholder dialogue is involved when you're trying to disrupt the way things are done?
Are you talking about the approval process by FDA, for instance, in the US?
Yeah, things like this. Because sometimes there was this case in which DNA testing and it was not rigorous enough, but only after a few months they started to introduce something which avoids that kind of thing.
It's a very complicated question you are actually answering, and because you can get approved in US through different routes. And if you believe that you have a disruptive technology, you would like to get better financial incentive through the reimbursement system. In US, the government will pay, or the insurance company will pay for a product if it's much better, if it's for more benefit for the patient. But all products, they are categorized in a group, and this type of device will get this kind of reimbursement, and this type will get this, and you cannot get more. So even if you have a better product, but it's much more expensive, you will not be able to get a higher reimbursement support for the product. So very often you would like then to negotiate with FDA that our product is superior to all this other and should be in an independent category with a higher reimbursement rate. But that takes a long time. If you would just settle saying, it's okay for me to be in this group, then you can apply for the so-called 510K system, that you just say, this is similar to this group, but then you only achieve the same kind of reimbursement, which you very often don't want to have. So it's a matter of time, and it can take a long, long time to get that approval.
The gentleman, thank you.
Hello, my name is Nicholas. So you showed us that you have a scientist background.
Yes.
And then you become a successful entrepreneur.
Yes.
By doing successful businesses. So could you explain a little bit more how, when, and where do you got all the knowledges to become an entrepreneur? Or another way, what would you recommend to scientists who are doing now academic research if they want to move to the business side? I mean, what would you recommend to them to do?
Well, for me it came quite natural because I was a scientist. I worked for a biotech company. We were quite successful because we were quite successful and we were the first company going on the Copenhagen Stock Exchange. All new start or some of the new start companies would like to approach me and said, would you like to be on our boards, because then they could use my experience, even though it was not a great experience at that point in time, or they could at least use my name. It would create a credibility to these other companies that they could say I was on the board because I was fairly well known, because research was such a huge success. So I think I learned to be a businessman by doing. I was getting on a number of boards with some fairly high profile business people, and in the beginning I was quite silent at board meetings. I was just learning, and eventually I understood it better and better. So it was learning by doing. I'd never taken advanced courses in being a manager, and then I was asked if I would like to become the CEO of a company, and so it came gradually. And I think it needs to be either you do it gradually by normal development, or you take a choice and say, I'm a scientist or I'm a physician, but I would also like to be in business. Then you take an MBA course and become an MBA besides your scientific degree, which can also be very, very successful. But being a scientist and saying, now I just want to be in management, that would be like jumping out of a cliff.
Any further questions? This gentleman.
Hello. And now if you have idea...
Sorry, your name, please?
My name is Li Shihao. And now if you, I have a question. If you have idea and you think this idea is great enough, and you turn this idea to a technology and they build up company, a startup company, and when after introducing to the market, nobody willing to pay, and they're not dying for it, what will you do next?
Well, I guess at that point in time, it's too late to do much.
Too late.
But you should have much earlier investigated the market, understood the market, talked to specialists who understands the market, and make sure that whatever technology you have and the product you're trying to develop will actually also be accepted on the market. So there's a lot of work that you need to do before you spend all those money. When that is said, I would like to say that I just don't think that you will reach that point in time, because you would need investors. And of course, unless you can find the so-called 3 Fs, that is family, fools, and things like that, and friends. If you go to professional investors, they will understand this, and in their due diligence process, before they make the investment, they will make those kind of assessments whether your product would actually be successful on the market. And I doubt that they will invest in the money unless they're pretty sure, and if they're skillful enough, you will not get the money.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Next question.
Hello, Adam Clark Chang. Yeah, so I'm an academic. I'm happy staying an academic, but I'd like to spin some stuff out of my lab. But how do I find that team that will do that, or how do I go about doing that? Maybe that's a too general question.
No, that's fine. I think I would, if I were you, I would get advice from someone I trusted, which were in the industry. Perhaps you know some people, you can ask them, how did they get started, who should I talk to, things like that. I'm pretty sure that if you're in academia, you will have tech transfer offices which are in dialogue with a number of investors. They might be able to assist you to some venture capitalists, and they will know a number of people that they could put into different positions, like the CEO role or whatever it is. If you would like to stay in academia, for instance, they would find a team for you. If you would like to be in that company and leave academia, you could have a role there. But again, as I said, I think it's very important that there's someone in the team with a scientific background and someone with a management background. But there will be someone that can assist you.
Thank you. Yes, the gentleman.
Hi, I'm Abhinav from NUS. My question is that in today's world, when you can outsource a couple of, like almost every task in a company, how do you see outsourcing, as an investor, how do you see outsourcing in-house R&D as a viable model for startups? Although, like, they could do R&D in-house as well.
There's been a clear development over the last 20, 30 years. Long time ago, everybody was talking about critical mass within a company. You needed to have all the core expertise in the company, and you needed to be at least a certain amount of people before you were sufficiently covered with all the different expertise areas to run a business. That has changed over the time. The problem having a core mass, let's say you're 100 or 200 people in a company, that is that you have to pay salary to all these people all the time. And sometimes you might not need all of these different experts within your company, and it's very difficult to lay them off and then say 6 months later, would you like to join us again? So today there's a much better understanding that what is not essential for the company to keep in-house, you can outsource, because even though you pay more for the job done than if you have them all in-house, it's much more flexible. So the minute you have used their expertise and you don't need them anymore, you just lay off. That one point. Another point is that every time you hire a new person, it takes time before this person is up and running in the company. There's a learning process every time, which also takes a lot of time. So I think investors today like to see some core activities inside the company, and all the rest can be outsourced.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can we have any other questions? No. Come on, give a chance to somebody else. This gentleman.
Hi, thanks for sharing your interesting journey. My name is Wei Ling. There are a lot of Indian companies that are making drugs. What is your view in terms of this lower cost of productions and selling at a low price to the biotech technology as a whole? And also, what is your view on the impact on investors in general?
Wow, that's a huge question you're answering, because that the whole battle between, especially in poor countries, they would like to have cheap medicine. They cannot afford the sometimes outrageous cost of a product. And it can be very detrimental for them if they don't get the medicine. So how do you find the right balance between the pharmaceutical companies, which invest billions of dollars in being innovative and come up with new products, and they need to get that investment back, otherwise they won't do it. And with the rising demands to get a product on the market, it becomes more and more of a problem. In the 1960s, you could spend, let's say, $100 million, and it would take you 3 years' time. You could have a product on the market. But then, because of you have a patent lifetime of 20 years, you must still have 17 years left where you had market exclusivity to gain your investment of, let's say, $200 million. But today, if it takes 15 years and you spend $2 billion, you have only 5 years left in order to get all your investment back and make a profit. And if a pharma company can see that if a product is delayed, the patent life is shortening before it expires, they just make a decision not to develop this drug, even though it looks quite interesting, because they will never be able to retrieve the investment. So that's a huge problem for the community as such, that there's this huge demand in order to get approved on the market. The next question then comes, every time you see a product becoming generic, the price might fall to 5%, 10% of the original price. And how do you find the balance there? And I understand, especially in India, they have a debate at the moment because of the patent laws in India. and somehow they at the moment they are struggling finding this balance. Coming from the biotech industry making new innovative drugs, of course, I find it very important to see that you can actually get the investment back, because otherwise it will die and you will not get any further. But on the other hand, we also need to find models for poor countries so that they can treat, for instance, HIV in sub-Sahara areas in Africa. It's a challenge, but you need to find it. There has been a number of foundations like the Bill Gates Foundation and other foundations which are actually giving out a lot of money in order to support these regions with it. But we need to have a financial incentive, otherwise the pharma industry will die and it will only be disruptors, and there will be no new innovation.
Right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Wong Yuan. I found your presentation very interesting, in particular only the first part. So as you know, Singapore is encouraging entrepreneurship, and your first part of the sharing about Denmark, which I was there just a couple of months ago, definitely sounds like it's a very, it doesn't encourage entrepreneurship, and yet you are very successful. Can you share with us what else can we do in Singapore, given your situation? What have you learned?
Yeah, I think you need to have a number of initiatives for people to start thinking about how to become an entrepreneur. I'm pretty sure that you have a financial incentive in this region because you have a fairly low tax. Every time I make some money, I have to pay 60% back in tax. If you pay 10%, it's much more you keep for yourself. So you have at least a financial incentive. But how do you then transform from being, let's say, a scientist at a university and start making a company? And I think that the government should set up, and I know that you have set up a number of initiatives in order to improve that. In Denmark, we have a number of courses. We have interaction between our scientific universities and our management universities, so they talk to each other and making courses so that these people can interact. So it's, as you ask about, that it's not just scientists but also management people with those kind of skill sets that works together. But very often in Denmark we also have that you can seek grants, because normally if you're an academic in a university you can seek grants for your academic career. But what then if you made an invention and it can also be useful commercially? So we have in Denmark set up grants for commercial exploitation of an invention. So you can get money and then you could get like a year off your academic career, still working in your same lab, but now you have funded primarily in order to evaluate whether it can be used commercially. And then when that time period lapses, you will then be able to attract either venture capitalists or other investors, or you'll just go back to your academic career. I think you need a number of initiatives because there's a prolonged period where you need some kind of support, both with regard to the advice, but also financially.
Right. Thank you, Leif. So on a final note, do you have any parting advice for the scientist who wants to be a multimillionaire startup founder?
Yeah.
If there's one thing you will tell them.
Yeah. Don't do it if you only want to do it because you want to be a billionaire. You should really want to do it because you are an entrepreneur, not because of the money.
Thank you. Very impressive. Round of applause for Leif. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jensen and Mr. Han. On behalf of Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship of SMU, we would like to invite Professor Desai, Director of Institute of Innovation and Entrepreneurship of SMU, to present a token of appreciation to Mr. Leif Helth Jensen.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for attending our Distinguished Speaker Series. We would appreciate if you could spend a couple of minutes to fill in a comment card and pass it to the IIE staff on your way out to the dinner reception. Thank you and have a pleasant evening.